Hello, everybody, and welcome to this month's Specifying Practice Group call. With that, I do want to hand it over to David and Lewis to get started with today's session. David and Lewis are our co-chairs and fearless leaders, I guess you'd call it, of the group. So, David and Lewis, if you have anything else you want to add to the group, or I'll let you get going with today's session.
All right. Well, thank you, Matt. Fearless. I'm not so sure about that. This is Dave, coming to you from southern New Jersey. Sort of a gloomy, overcast, very windy day. Finally, the wind is slowing down a bit, but interesting weather we're having here. So, Lewis.
Hello. I'm coming to you from sunny downtown Nashville. Sunny and mild. We've had kind of a cool 3 or 4 weeks. But the rain has passed, so
Lewis, this was your brilliant idea today, right?
Yes,
I'm giving you all of the credit, whether you want it or not.
That's 2 in a row, so that means that next month is all yours, pal, all yours.
Gotcha. So I've got to come up with an interesting topic then. Help! All of you listening in today, you heard me. Help!
Dave and I actually thought that this might be an interesting follow-up to last week's discussion on lean techniques, lean design. We had a guest presenter, Mike Jap, and if you haven't heard that, I do recommend that you go back and listen to the recording, because Mike hosts the leanarchitecture.com website and has blogs and all kinds of very good information and suggestions about improving your practice there. And he was kind enough to give us some great ideas and share some concepts with us. And today is kind of a follow-up, because in many respects, a lot of the stuff involved in integrated project delivery is intended to speed up the process. But before we begin, we do have 2 polls, and I just wanted to kind of get a feel for how many people have actually dabbled in IPD. So Matt, would you please run up that first poll?
Okay, so Lewis, you mentioned speed up the process, but I think we're going to talk about a lot more in the way of benefits for IPD.
Yeah, there are a lot of benefits. A small concept is a lot of people are attracted to IPD because it helps. It's less adversarial than many construction experiences, because people are sitting on the same side of the table. Even if they're not linked in a contract, it really does help. Okay, so we do have about half of the folks have experienced at least 1 or 2 IPD projects. And let's go on to the next poll then, if you would, Matthew. The next one has to do...
I'm more in the 6% that answered, I don't know. And here's the rationale behind this. Believe it or not, I was teaching a CDT exam prep class in one of my clients' offices. And I asked the question, because we were talking about delivery methods, asked the question if they had done IPD, and I was expecting the answer to be no, and we'd just go on from there. They answered yes, and I had to stop and ask, well, which project was that? When they told me, I had to scratch my head, because it was one that the construction had completed about 3 years prior, and one for which we wrote the specification. So that was the first I had heard that it was actually IPD.
Well, it wasn't a fully IPD, because if you weren't sitting at the table, it wasn't. The whole point about IPD is to be much, much more collaborative. Well, the results are in. Looks like a little over half have actually participated in a 3-way contract where the owner, architect, and contractor are all linked by a single contract. My firm has done some IPD projects, but we have used the separate contracts. We'll be talking about that a little bit later in the program. There's a lot of reasons why people have been looking for new solutions for delivering projects. The system that we've had for the last 100 years or so is people are beginning to think that there must be faster ways to save time and hence save money. We have new tools available to us like BIM that make it possible to share information in a way that we couldn't do when we were restricted to 2D drawing, especially manual drawing. Lean is at pressure. People realize that there are ways to be more efficient, more effective, and more profitable. And one of the things is actually demographics. This is not... Yes.
So, Louis, I think there's one item possibly missing from your list, and
what's that?
Risk reduction.
Oh, yes. Well,
if we can get the cooperation going on early on in the project, certainly it's going to remove a lot of the risk, and sometimes hidden risk, that the owners may not even be aware that is there in construction documents.
And that relates a lot to easing off on that adversarial relationship. At my previous firm, we did a project where the contractor was playing games, and this is not common, but it does happen, where they were using RFI forms for transmittals. So that the concept was that at the end of the project, they would have thousands of RFIs to be able to go back to the owner and try to get some extra money, or to convince them that they were somehow being taken advantage of by those cruel and heartless and incompetent architects and engineers that they did the design. So getting people talking earlier and working together in a collaborative method, and the collaboration is really a primary thing. But one of the reasons we need to think about having more efficient ways of delivering projects is the real fact of the effect of demographics on, in particular, the design industry. As you can see from this chart, this is something that came out, 15, 20 years ago, a good 15 years ago, was published by the California AIA. They'd actually done a survey, and they actually had numbers to go with this chart, which is just a diagram. Really, it's not an accurate representation of numbers, but the number of architects leaving the profession versus the number of graduates entering the profession, you can see is a line crossing, and not only is the number of graduates coming out of school not that much different from when in the dark ages when Dave and I went through school back in the late 60s, early 70s. But there are now two other industries that compete for architectural graduates, namely the gaming industry and Hollywood. And of course, there is the issue of the birth dearth, is that we are not replacing ourselves as a people, that our birth rate is below replacement levels. So
I want to be the only architect left standing when that line hits zero, right? I'll have all the work I could possibly want.
You have more work than you can do right now, Dave. That's what you get for being successful.
Yeah, I suppose so. But I think you're right, and we see even here locally, the county that I live in, we already have significantly more deaths than births in a year, so just the decline in population has got to have an effect.
Yes, and we're not having a huge influx, a great growth in the architectural schools. They're still graduating about the same number of people that they were sometime in the early 70s. So this is going to affect us. If your firm hasn't felt this pinch already, it will. In 5 to 10 years, you may find it increasingly difficult to find entry-level people. Well, let's talk about, but this is a diagram that I took from one of the various sources on lean architecture. I did not compile these figures myself. And the point of this is that the productivity of general non-farm industry is the blue line, and you can see that the productivity has been rising steadily. But the construction productivity in the construction industry, represented by the red line, has been at a small but steady decline over the years. And so contractors want to deal, they have in many respects, they are pushing for IPD and for lean activities, because they know that they have got to be able to do this to be more productive.
It'd be interesting to see where that red line is trending now, because this is cutting off at like 2005, and to see if it's making any improvements.
Unfortunately, that's the latest information I could find when I put this presentation together about a year ago, or a little over a year ago, for internal purposes. So there's a slightly different language that we need to learn, is that we have basically the same 4 phases of design, but they have new names. And in some respects, they are an improvement. In the A201, that's the traditional general conditions. The A295 is the AIA, general conditions for integrated project delivery. And in that terminology, then the pre-design is conceptualization, which I think is really a much better term. And criteria design is an excellent term to replace schematic design. Detailed design is got the same abbreviation of DD. And then finally, we have implementation documents, and we're going to see how those work out in practice here in a couple of slides.
And so you mentioned the abbreviations. ID could pose an interesting dilemma, since we're all coming up through the industry knowing that is interior design. But to me, this is interesting because the phases are essentially identical. They're parallel. It's a different name. You start to look at some of the deliverables that are required for each of the phases, and it's very similar to A201.
Well, actually, the difference is that they are more closely defined. One of the things about the traditional SD, DD, and in particular those 2 phases, is that if you look in the AIA handbook, it defines them, but the definitions are pretty vague, partly because the handbook has to work for everybody from a single practitioner who does houses to a multi-firm, multi-discipline office that does major campuses of multiple buildings and high-rise buildings and complex buildings like hospitals. But and we talked about last month about the concept that firms should develop a more clear definition of these 2 phases, but in IPD they are contractually a little clearer, and we'll talk about that.
Okay, we have a couple of comments here. Sheldon Wolf chimed in that there is a chart, and I happened to go look it up, Sheldon, so I don't know if you want to chime in and describe this yourself. You're welcome to do that. Just raise your hand and Matt will unmute you if you're able. But he's pointing to a chart that's showing an actual job growth in both architectural drafters and architects. And the growth has been, looking at this, it might have hit a low in 2011 and has been growing since.
Well, that could be, especially I think the concept of the drafter is may have a resurgence.
Well, this chart is showing drafters and architects, and they're both on a parallel path.
Oh, interesting. Well, I'll have to look at that.
And not far apart.
Okay. Well, Sheldon, why don't you send me a link to that, and I'll take a look at it afterwards. And so perhaps I'm being premature in my worries about the demographics.
Okay, we have a couple more comments. One from Dittmer Scheel, who's saying many contractors enjoy design build over design bid build construction because of greater profit margins. How does IPD compare that way? Are contractors interested in this approach?
Oh, I think that is a definite motivation for contractors. I did not work real closely on the two projects that were IPD in my firm, but I was in on a couple of the early meetings with the contractor, and they were very enthusiastic about the method because it did have a number of benefits to them. It was more efficient, more productive, and that translates into a better profit margin, as well as being able to do more projects in the same amount of time. If you're limited to the number of buildings because of your bonding limitations, that if you can only do 2 projects a year, 3 projects a year, and then all of a sudden, because you can collapse the time, you can do more projects, go from 3 projects a year to 4 projects a year. Obviously, that's a method of being able to get higher profits.
Well, I would ask you on that one, Lewis, is it really that you're collapsing the construction time, or is it just that you're overlapping design and construction? So from a contractor's point of view, wouldn't the total construction time remain almost the same?
It is, but it starts earlier because the construction can start during design. So it's a fast-track method, basically.
Okay, so we have one more question here from William Jones.
Collapsing the time, I'm talking about the overall project time, and the only way to do that is to overlap construction and design.
Right. Okay, so from William Jones, commenting on the decline, and I think this was the decline in the profession, some of this decline may be due to the increase in regulatory demand on construction in general.
Hard to say.
Yep. I would agree.
It can certainly be very discouraging.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So, well, we need to define it. It's as you can see that the emphasis here is on collaboration. That this is really the goal, and you can read some of the benefits here that we've already talked about. Some of them that people are looking for, and even a lot of owners are getting to hear about this and become interested in it.
Do you find these benefits are that they change depending upon the actual contractual relationship, whether it's a single party or single entity contract, or whether it's a 3-party contract?
I don't know. Since we have not yet done a single entity contract IPD project. We've only done the ones with separate design and construction contracts. I really can't comment on that, so I don't know. I do know that the projects that we've had, we did 2 hospital projects, and of course hospitals, because they are so complicated, you get into a lot of RFIs, a lot of potential change orders, and the 2 projects that we did just went so much smoother, very, very few RFIs, next to no change orders, and just everybody was happy, happy, happy.
A very nice testimonial.
Yes, which says, by the way, that one of the questions that we had, a couple of folk wrote in last week with a couple of questions that I promised to try to answer during the session. And one of the questions was, why is this a formal delivery method and not just a practice standard? And we will get into that in a little bit in terms of some of the mechanics. Why is IPD different from what we do with regular contract arrangements? But part of it is that so that's part of the deal. There are different types, and this is the one where, as I say, my firm is participated in, and that's where the design and the construction contracts are separate. And again, we use the A295 general conditions for the arrangement. And there are special forms because the contractual obligations are different. That's why we're not using the regular forms. Consensus docs also has a set of form contracts and a general conditions document for IPD projects.
Okay, we have a comment from Dave Metzger. I think this is an interesting one.
Oh, Dave is always interesting.
Yes, he is. I think the largest drawback to IPD is that it does not take into account human nature. Depends upon hard design decisions being made earlier in the process. Hello, how many designers do you know that want to stop designing? What planet do they live on?
Well, that begins to answer Kristen's question about, well, why is this a formal delivery method and not a practice standard, is because now some of those things that are good practice are contractual obligations, Dave. And that's one of the things about it, is that you contract. I have been saying for the last 25, 30 years that there ought to be enough information in the drawings and whatever kind of specifications, whether that outline or a more elaborate PPD, preliminary project description, whatever, at the end of DD, to be able to hard bid a project with no basic changes from arising out of the contract documents during construction. Not enough information to build the project, but enough to hard bid it.
Well, that goes along with the arrangement that they have in the design phase names as well.
Yes,
that,
and
the implication is that design finishes before you get into documenting the implementation. Implementation documents. Sorry, tripped over that one.
The other thing I will say is that when I worked in Cincinnati, I worked for the leading design firm in town, the firm that won most of the high-profile projects and won most of the more design awards than most of the firms. We weren't the biggest office in town, but we were the leading design office. And one of their secrets was we were also extremely profitable. One of the secrets was that our designers, as a matter of good practice, would make good decisions early and then stick with them and not revisit things. So, but we were talking about the different types of IPD. So this was the one that's is the easiest to get into. It doesn't require any special arrangements. Then there are ones where the three primary parties are linked in a single contract, and in that case there is a different agreement form. And then there's even a form where the owner, architect, and contractor actually form a separate little limited liability corporation just for this one project. And again, there's a separate contract form for that from AIA.
Okay, and so what is the biggest impediment to these arrangements where it's a single entity?
Well, I think there's a lot of concern about liability. Will the AE get pulled into worker safety issues? There are issues about the intellectual property rights to the design when it's complete. Who owns that? In the traditional AIA world, the documents are instruments of service, but the architect still owns the design as such. It's copyrighted. Whereas if we've got this three-part arrangement, does that change that? The intellectual property rights to the model, because as we're going to see, an integral part of IPD is sharing design information while it's being created, and in most cases that's going to be BIM, building information modeling.
Okay, and I think there's one that's much more basic.
Well, I got one more, but okay.
Well, I can let you finish that.
Yours is probably fear.
No,
okay.
No, it is not fear, but it could be, because these arrangements are uninsurable.
That's not exactly true.
According to the insurance brokers, it is.
Not exactly.
Okay, so then what do you know that nobody else knows?
Well, I've read up on the subject. We are insured by XL America, used to be XLDP, and according to their documents, sometimes you do have to make special arrangements. It doesn't say that they won't insure it, that they may want to have a hand in say in looking at the contracts and advising you on some contract language, but it is not beyond necessity. Now, the first form, where you still have the separate contracts, usually it's a non-issue. But if you are getting into a single provider entity, it says that it does say that you may require special, let's see, where is it saying? Some believe that current professional liability coverage is adequate. Others think a new product is required. Others suggest that some sort of wrap-up coverage for design risk of all project participants is needed. But it does say that in their official document that it's not undoable. You just have to talk to them and make special arrangements.
Okay, I would just caution anybody entering into this form.
Absolutely.
Please contact your insurance agent, only because one of the concerns is essentially you're insuring against your own negligence, and you're insuring yourself against the other two principles of the contract, and it's complicated at best.
It is. The other thing I was going to mention is you get into a warranty for the performance of the facility. And similarly, on the other side of the table, or the contractor may be in effect warranting the design of the project or be involved in the warranting of the design, because, as we're going to see, IPD involves a certain level of design assist where the contractor does in fact participate in the design. Another bit of hesitation is the issue of what under the building code constitutes the design professional and responsible charge, and its duties, and how does that is that affected if you have a contractual relationship with the contractor. Some of these we've had to deal with for years anyway if we were in a design build arrangement, so some of it's not new, but you are going to have to talk to your insurer about it and the specifics of your arrangements.
Okay, so I've got an excellent question here from Ronald Crouch.
Oh,
right?
good.
Yes. What is the best treatment for ulcers? From structural engineers when asked to submit early foundation and steel packages for construction when the rest of the building is still under design. I've seen it put I've seen it put a consultant in the hospital that does milk work for ulcers.
I don't know. Yeah, of course, the question is, did the ulcers come before or after the owner said, well, why did you rip out all that concrete and throw away all those steel beams? You expect me to pay for that?
No, the single entity pays for it. It was their decision collectively.
That's true. And in these single entity arrangements, not only do you share on the rewards, you do share in the risks. And so, yes, there is a fear factor, and it's a reasonable fear factor that we need to get answers for. And in some ways, this is now, again, I'm speculating because I haven't been in one of these single entity contracts. There is the possibility that we are getting out slightly ahead of where state law is. Not that we're being contrary to it, but the law hasn't caught up with the industry.
Okay, so Tommy Smith suggests a solution for Ronald. He says, increase the capacity of the foundation. All right. And
That's right.
Ron Ray asks, what warranty does the architect give for a design under any delivery system?
Well, actually, pretty much the only warranty is that you're going to provide professional services at the generally accepted level for your peers. That is what's the legal phrase? Help me, David. What's the legal phrase? I'm pulling a blank. Standard of care.
Standard of care, yes, that's it.
Thanks, Ron. Our audience is quick on the button. I sure appreciate that. They're actually paying attention to us, Dave.
Scary, isn't it?
It is. So that's basically all we want. But the problem is see, in the bedrock foundation of construction law is the Spearman doctrine that says that if a contractor builds it according to the drawings and specs, you can't sue him because the building doesn't work. The original lawsuit had to do with a wastewater treatment plant because it was faulty design. But the court said, no, they built it right. If it didn't work, it wasn't his problem. It's your problem, Mr. Owner, and the owner had to go after somebody else. But if we are linked in with the contractor, that is a question that everybody needs to ask, that if we're in the same contract, then does the contractor become somewhat responsible for the effectiveness of the design because they're commenting on it as we do it? And does the owner or does the architect become partly responsible for the means and methods and the worker safety and the other things that relate to getting the project built correctly? And that warranty.
Yep.
So, we all know that as we progress in a project, the cost of design changes rises, and that's partly because of the ripple effect. So if I discover halfway through the CD phase that the windows that I've selected and the way I've got them detailed don't work, and I've already got 20, 30 details for that, and I have to go back and change them, obviously that's going to cost me a lot of money. Whereas if it discovered back in schematics that window won't work, and maybe only had one sketch, maybe not even a formal drawing, then obviously that costs a lot less to change.
I thought BIM changed all this.
Not yet. You can still be dumb with BIM.
Okay.
You can quote me on that. Let's see. Okay. So this is the traditional project effort. We start with a cocktail napkin. My firm is having an internal contest, by the way, on for people making sketches on cocktail napkins, which are being furnished so that it's a standardized size, 5 by 5 inches. We get into the schematic design development, and then the bulk of the work is actually in CDs. Now, I have not drawn these phases to scale in terms of the length of time, but we all know that traditionally the bulk of work occurs during construction, or during the CD phase, construction documents phase. And we seen something like this last month with Mike had a very similar chart. So now we realize that again, if we're still making basic design decisions, all of a sudden we realize that because other design decisions may affect the current design decision we're making, that the cost to rethink our design is going to be much higher. We're talking about internal, of course, costs for how many hours does it take to change 20 or 30 window or curtain wall details. And I have a perfect example of this is that some years ago at my previous firm, the guys were doing a entertainment venue, and up on the 3rd floor we had a glass box that was the pre-function area, and they wanted the glass box to have walls that leaned out, and it was set at an angle to the basic orthographic grid of the structural system and the rest of the building. Nifty looking idea. And I kept talking to the guy, to the project architect. I was the project specifier. Said, you gotta talk to a curtain wall guy, because I think you've got some problems with some of the areas that you've in your particular design. And he just put it off until about 1/3 of the way through CDs. And sure enough, the guy came in and said, oh yeah, we can do this, but we need to change these mullion spacings, and we need to move this. When the dust settled, the HVAC guy had to move had to change the drawings for the baseboard heating. The electrical engineer had to change some of the lighting, the locations of lights and the number of lights. And the structural guy team had to move a couple of columns. So the cost for that was quite a bit more than if we had worked that out at the beginning of DDs. And that's a common kind of things. So here's what we want to try to accomplish with the green curve. And I have to admit, Mike's diagram of this last month was a lot prettier than mine.
I got to say too, Louis, in this one, actually the AIA IPD guide actually shows probably even a further shift to the left for your green line. And the green line never exceeds the ability to make the change.
Yeah, that's ideal. Yep, I'll have to redraw this guy thing one of these days. I won't have time.
And I think that would truly be ideal if it never really does exceed the ability to make the change.
Yes, that intersection between the two lines, the red and the blue line, that would be ideal. Because in IPD, one of the contractual obligations that makes it different, makes this a formal method of delivery rather than just good practice, is that there's a contractual obligation that all the major design decisions are made by the end of the detailed design phase. We might still pick some paint colors and some carpet patterns in CDs, but basically the expensive stuff in the building has to be, the systems, everything has to be documented by the end of detailed design. Now, what does that say about specifications, Dave?
They don't talk much about specifications in IPD documents. You know that?
I noticed that, yes.
Yes. They mention outline or performance specs during criteria design, and they mention final specs as part of implementation docs. I don't say anything about detailed design having anything related to specifications. So if we're trying... But in fact, where are we going to actually set the contract limit? Where are we going to get to that GMP? Where are we going to finalize that design? And how are we going to price it unless we have all of the documents to do it?
Right. Is it a modified bitumen roof or is it a single-ply TPO? Is it a curtain wall system? And if so, what kind of curtain wall system? What kind of glass? All of that, there's big bucks involved in those decisions. We can change the brick color, but whether it's brick or ACM is a big decision that needs to be made during the detailed design phase.
Okay.
And
now, at the risk of being maybe in a self-interest because of PPD format, I will say that I believe if we approach this outline specification required by IPD, if we approached it as a PPD kind of a document, that we could easily start that at pre-construction. We could develop it much more detailed during design criteria.
In many cases.
And I believe the contractor and the subs could actually price from a PPD document during detailed design. So we don't necessarily need typical construction specifications, but we need a well-formulated project description to be able to get to a firm price.
Yes, and not only to a firm price, but one of the things that we do with the construction documents, that are one of the reasons we write specifications, is that the contractor uses those for its subcontracts, so that there is a legal obligation to build the right stuff. And but you're quite right. As a matter of fact, I think the preliminary project description can even begin before you start sketching, because you can, if the owner has owner project requirements, they may already have preference for a roofing system, for example. They may want a certain appearance that you're going to have at least some brick walls or whatever. That some of those decisions can be documented up front. And I quite concur with you that one of the ways to provide the deliverable that's needed at the end of the detailed design phase is to have a preliminary project description that is now more fully flushed out, that's got all the documents, all the things. It's a deliverable. It can be a contract document between the owner and the general contractor for establishing the GMP, and there shouldn't be any surprises that affect contract sum as we prepare the implementation docs that the contractor can use for its subcontracts.
Right, because the implementation docs in this case are akin really to shop drawings, and perhaps the design team and the construction team working together to be able to get to that point.
Yeah. Also, I've always felt like, in design development, as I mentioned earlier, there should be enough information to bid it, not necessarily enough information to build the project. And one of the things that can happen is that at the end of DDs, whether you're doing traditional or IPD, is that you have some heart-to-heart conversations with the contractor and say, well, what do I really need to detail? I'm convinced that a lot of the details that we produce, a lot of the drawings, the contractor doesn't use. They never look at them. So what is really essential to be built? And those things are what are needed to implement the design to make it a reality. The one thing that won't happen, I think, at this point, Dave, is outline specs.
Yes, I hope so.
Not that I'm, it's just in the reality of the world, people don't want to invest a lot of time and energy in what they see as a single-use throwaway document. And so that's, I think the two best choices are you just go ahead and do construction specifications at that point, or you do the full PPD. I think the MEP engineers are going to vote for the full specifications but there are the possibilities.
And while you go on to the next slide, because we have only 10 minutes left in our hour, Tommy Smith asks, so what documents are used as the basis to enforce regulatory process or building inspections?
Well, those are the implementation documents, the actuals, because the PPD, even though it's issued as a deliverable, is not a construction document, is not issued under seal as such. So it's the sealed construction documents that are for the building permit and so forth. So, but just as a summary of the conceptualization phase, figuring out what's going to be built, who's going to build it, these preliminary ideas, and a very important one is down at the bottom is an analysis of the owner's program by the designer and the contractor, because we all know that sometimes our owners, bless their hearts, have desires and expectations that cannot be realized for the amount of money that they have to spend on the project.
That does happen on occasion.
So we have criteria design phase, and I really like the name of that, where we look at, well, what are the parameters, what are the things that we have to work to, how are we going to get the water off the roof, what are the basic schema that we're going to use to enclose the building, the walls, the roof, and so forth, and what are the functional necessities of those elements. And then our detailed design phase, figuring out the what, and again stressing that all the key design decisions are finalized. And this first bullet talks about the regular meetings, and we're going to see that here in a minute. I've got an excerpt from our internal flow chart that we use for IPD projects. But it's fully defined, it's fully engineered, it's fully coordinated, it's fully validated. It will work. There just may not be quite enough information for the individual mechanics who are installing the work to figure out how they're going to construct this particular corner. They know how to price it. And that's what implementation drawings are about. Shifting from what to how.
But then part of the discussion with IPD too is if we're talking about this as a way to save time, it seems that some of these phases may have blurred lines. That you may be working on implementation for those foundation documents while you're still doing the design work for the building enclosure.
Well, and yes, and that's true, because it is a fast-track method of construction. We're not going to do all this pencils down, and then when the whole process is done, then they go out and build it. The whole point is to try to collapse that period, and so yes, it's going to have multiple work packages. It's going to have some issues, but those things have to be decided upon early, and some of the areas of the project, like the foundations, you're going to be in implementation drawings while you're still in the criteria drawings for something else. And again, the difference is that the construction documents, drawings, and specifications are issued under seals. And then finally, the ideal thing is you're reaping the benefits, minimizing RFIs and change orders, and avoiding the redesign at the last minute. Even we've all worked, at least I'm sure, with at least some architects who want to redesign the building during the submittal phase. But make
So
good
this really-
decisions early and stick with them.
Yeah, so this really comes down to effective planning, right, to get to the point of starting construction. And reminds me of the Dilbert cartoon that appeared this morning in the paper, where Wally is asking the boss whether or not he should actually spend time doing some planning.
We're
right?
going to show that. We're going to show that to folks.
Okay, is that the one?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, then I will leave it to you to show.
So when we got into this, I went through the A295 very carefully, and this is a flow chart, and it's called a swim lane flow chart because it shows who's doing what tasks. So the owner is primarily responsible for all the things that are in that ochre color. The blue is the architect, and the pink is or purple lavender is the contractor. You notice, and then some of the items cross lanes, but the primary responsibility for those meetings that those represent, those three-way meetings, is the owner. So one of the things that about IPD that is quite a bit different is there has to be a much, much greater participation by the owner in the early phases, or well, throughout the design phases of the project. The owner basically has to drive the bus. The owner has to make timely decisions, and we all know that sometimes it's difficult to get our clients to do that. But I actually have this for all four of the phases. The amount of work effort on the owner's part, they will certainly reap many of the rewards. It certainly, I think, is worth their while. But if they are contemplating doing this, they have to realize that they've got to set aside some fairly senior staff to do this almost full time.
So is this really much different than what might be ideal under just a design bid build?
No, it's not. As a matter of fact, some years ago, back in the 80s, we did a project in Cincinnati where our owner came in for weekly design meetings. It was a juvenile detention facility, and the director of that facility is nationally known as an expert and as a guiding light. And so he went from the programming all the way through the end of construction documents with a very, very much of a hand-on. We did not have a lot of input from the contractor because it had to be competitively bid, and it was actually multiple prime contracts since it was the state of Ohio on a public project. But it is a lot more work for the owner than most owners are used to for a project. Even developers don't do the level of work level of effort that's necessary for an IPD project.
So what if we just paid more attention to the design process and actually had measurable milestones and points of decision, points of no return on some of those decisions, and identified those and tracked those through design? It would seem like we would accomplish essentially the same thing.
Pretty much. The difference is that we have a lot more involvement also by the contractor very early, so that we know, for example, we might have a preference for one kind of roofing, but if the overall budget is not going to go for modified bitumen, we know that early, and so we don't have to change details at a later time. I know on a couple of these two hospital projects, we were making arrangements for the major subcontractors, the electrical, HVAC, and plumbing subcontractors were brought on board very early, probably during the during the criteria phase, if not conceptualization phase. And so they began advising our team on how to implement what we thought were the best solutions. So our guys might think about, one particular type of mechanical system, and the contractor would be advising them on how to best implement that concept. And we were actually preparing to have some of their team move into our office, and we would be drawing the design drawings, and they would be a step or two behind us doing actual shop drawings in the same room. And our experience with that was limited, but it was very positive. So we get into a design assist kind of situation where if the curtain wall installer is doing some of the detailing, doing some of the shop drawings, then that means there's a few less details that we have to draw, and it's going to be a better job anyway, because there's no point in us drawing something that isn't going to be built. I see we're getting close to the end of our time.
We are.
We're going to make these slides available, and so you'll have access to these lists. These are just a few of the things that you can access on the internet. The AIA has one, that top one, IPD guide, is an excellent document. There's kind of a general overall introduction to the concepts. Construction management has a wonderful document, and there's a document from Victor Schinnerer, one of the leading E&O professional liability insurers, that has some documents. And here, oops, I lost it.
Oh, you can't lose that. Now you're just going to fight it.
Yeah, I know. So let me get down here. And here is...
Oh, there's the cartoon.
I lost it.
You've lost it again. Oh, dear. Quick, go back.
Well, that's why I let you run these things, and I'll do the talking, you do the showing.
There, just leave it there. That's fine. Planning, right? That's what it comes down to. Stop clicking that, Lewis.
I know. I am so sorry. Anyway, but yes. So we plan our work, or we just shoot from the hip and then start. And
I think we all know how most of the projects go. And even when we do plan, it probably lasts only a very short time, and we don't go back and replan.
Right.
Okay. So thank you, Lewis, for taking charge of this one today. I appreciate it, and I appreciate you giving me a bit of a break in preparing something for the group and sharing what you've already done for your firm. So that was it's a good insight, and I hope everybody enjoyed it. We have our next meeting will be May 5th, Cinco de Mayo. Wow. So maybe we'll have to do something around that theme for next month. I'll have to think about that one.
Well, I'll bring tacos.
Okay, good. Enough for everybody, please. All right. So thank you so much for joining us all today, and we really appreciate you having us and taking time to participate with all your questions. And you heard me at the start of the meeting. If you have any suggestions for next month, I would love to hear them. Thank you all.
I'd love to hear them too. Goodbye, everybody.
All right. Well, thank you, David and Lewis. And as they said, we'll see you again here on May 5th. Look for that invite coming out to your inbox shortly. All right. Thanks, everybody. You may now disconnect and go back to your workday.